I'm with Rosie Ross, who lives in Ashkelon but is originally from the UK, and we're talking about repairing the breach. Rosie, explain a little bit more about that.
The words repairing the breach come from the book of Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 58 verse 12. It talks about you will be repairers of the breach. And we are largely British Christians who want to repair the breach that occurred during the British Mandate to Palestine, as it was then known, now known as Israel, and always known by Jewish people as Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. The British called it Palestine. So that period was between 1917, 1918 and 1948. So it was a 30-year period in which the British really had the rulership over this land, and they had made certain promises with the Balfour Declaration, which were actually enshrined in a full legal treaty in San Remo in 1920. And Britain really ended up going back on the pledges that she had made to the Jewish people during that period. And we end up with a very, very sad situation where in 1939, the White Paper was issued in London, and that severely limited the immigration into Eretz Israel or Palestine at that time, obviously at the time of the Holocaust. And it was something that was met with huge outcry here in Israel by the Jewish people who were living in the land at that time. And we seek to make amends to those Jewish people who were met with blockades by the British Navy after 1939. And we have met many individuals who were on ships that the British turned away from the shores of this land. Some of them were sent back to Germany even. That's the story of the famous Exodus ship, 1947. Others were sent to British internment camps in Cyprus, and that was between 1946 and 1949. Many people don't know that the British held 52,000 Jewish people in internment camps behind barbed wire during that period. And so we have the privilege of meeting those who are now living here in the land and who are recognizing that we are truly sorry for what our government did at that time, and we want to repair the breach. We want to do what we can to make amends for what happened to them and their families. And we even find that those of the second generation are carrying the pain of their parents' story, and they are passionate about the story that they carry, that their parents' story often of coming out of the Holocaust and then being placed in camps by the British. They want to tell this story, and we're seeking to enable them to tell their stories in different ways. We've had a couple of tours to Britain. We've interviewed several of them, and others have come to meet British people when British people have come to Israel and told the stories to British people.
Now, you talked about the ships that were turned away. What happened to the people on those ships?
Well, I'll give the example of the Exodus ship. The Exodus ship was full of Holocaust survivors, 4,500 plus people, all in some way Holocaust refugees. Not everyone had been in a concentration camp, but many had been. And there were orphans as well. There were 6,000 orphans, I believe. I'll have to check my facts on that one. And what happened to that ship was they came to the shores of Eretz Israel, of Palestine, and the British put them on board what the British called hospital ships. There were 3 ships, deportation ships, and actually it's a far truer description to call those ships prison ships. They were like prisons. They were very overcrowded. They were insanitary, and they were turned away from what every Jewish person considers as their homeland, and they were put on these ships, and then it's a long story, but they were sent back to Germany, to the place of the Shoah, the place of the Holocaust. Can you imagine being a refugee who's come with longing to return to the land of Israel and then be turned away back to the land of Germany. And some of them were so upset, understandably, that when they arrived in Hamburg, the British army were finding Jewish people resisting them. And the British soldiers, were in a horrific situation, and they were coming with batons and hitting them, and some of them were wounded, and some of them were arrested by the British, thrown into prison. It was a horrific situation. And then they were taken to detention camps in Germany and put behind barbed wire. Again, with the Exodus, it was 1 year, but they were held in detention camps.
Have you had a commemoration about some of these things on the ships?
Commemoration for those who are on the ships. The Jewish people here in the land, they remember these stories. It's part of their heritage, and they have held their own commemorations for 70 years since the Exodus ship, this year, 75 years since the Exodus ship. We have taken part in both those events. It's been very privileged to express our sorrow through giving out special cards expressing our sorrow for what the British did. We've also given them flowers. We've bowed the knee, as it were, and humbled ourselves and said we messed up as a nation, and we want you to know that. And that has been met by huge appreciation, and I believe God has really enabled that to be real reconciliation at a very deep level. And two of us have also been back to Germany with a group of Israelis who were on board the Exodus ship. Actually, a group of 3 generations. So it was a group of over 40 Israelis, some of whom, I think it was 15, who'd been on the ship. They'd been on the Exodus ship. Others were the 2nd generation. Their parents had been on the ship. And others were 3rd generation. We even had one family where we had 1st, 2nd and 3rd generation. And for them it was a momentous thing to go back to Germany. Some of them had never wanted to go back to Germany, you can imagine, the land of the Holocaust. But they had chosen to go back and to revisit their family heritage, which included going to the remains of one of the British detention camps and going back to the docks in Hamburg. One of the women who had been, I think, 13 on the ship, she nearly had a panic attack when she went back and faced what she was seeing. But the lady who was with me from repairing the breech was really able to comfort her. And it was, again, such a sign of reconciliation, such an act of reconciliation. It was such a privilege that we were enabled to walk alongside these Jewish people as British people, and also to walk alongside German Christians who, as we know, have a real passion to seek to make restoration for what their country did. It's just that everyone knows what the Germans did, and it's not the same what the British did, but we are actually complicit in a different way in the Holocaust.
And you also went to Cyprus. Why Cyprus? What happened there?
52,000 Jewish refugees were held in camps in Cyprus between 1946 and 1949. And again, it's not a well-known story. It's very interesting because amongst the Israelis who are held in those camps who are still alive, and there are many who were born in those camps, there were around 2,000 who were born in those camps, and we've actually met quite a number of those who were born in the Cyprus camps. And one of those is a lady called Zahavit, and she and a lady called Etty, whose parents met in the Cyprus camps, came with us to go back to Cyprus. Again, it was a little like with Hamburg, retracing the steps, revisiting the heritage. So Zahavit had been back to Cyprus before. She'd been back quite a number of times. She'd been with other Israelis who've been back to Cyprus and who've visited the hospital where they were born. They've set up their own memorials, and it's very, very special to go and accompany them on these journeys of reconciliation. So what we did, and this is only a few months ago, we went back to Cyprus. There were 8 of us from Britain, all believers in Jesus, two of us living in Israel, but the rest had come specially from Britain to Cyprus to accompany these two ladies who carried this heritage of what happened to the Jewish people. And one of the highlights of our visit was to be able to go and visit the chief rabbi of Cyprus, who actually has a real passion that the story of these Cyprus camps that's little known would be known in the Jewish community, would be known in the world. And so we went to visit him and to express our sorrow as British people for what the British had done at that time. And we had with us a lady whose father had been in the British Army at the time of the British Mandate, so she carries the weight of responsibility for what her father was involved in. He wasn't actually a guard in one of the Cyprus camps, but he was involved in the British Army, and he was part of this whole story that really there's been a veil of silence over it for many years in Britain. And this lady really, on behalf of her father, was able to say, I'm truly sorry for what the British Army did, both on Cyprus and in Israel.
How has the response been from what you've been doing with repairing the breach?
I would say that most Israelis are shocked and surprised that we're coming. Some would say it's 70 years too late, but I don't think actually most of them feel that. Most of them are very, very appreciative. We've had those who've been in tears. We've had those who've hugged and embraced us. And they're overwhelmed, many of them, by the response. We have had some who have said, well, the British shouldn't have closed the doors, and they have a harder, when I say close the door, close the gates to the land of Israel at the time of the 1939 White Paper, and they're hardened, understandably, but on the whole there's been a real softening of hearts and a real desire to work together to make this history known.
Why do you do this?
I'm passionate about it because when I came to Israel, I knew absolutely nothing about this history. I'd studied history at university, and I've always loved history, and I've always loved Britain, and I've loved British history, but I knew nothing about this. And I came as someone who had been given a real love for the Jewish people. I was reading my Bible. One day I was reading the story of Abraham coming out, being called to come to the land of Israel, leaving his home and his family and his country to go to the land of Israel. And it just spoke very strongly to me, and I felt that actually I had to do the same as Abraham. I mean, it sounds a bit big-headed, but it was just like I just knew I had to come as well. And so I've had this passion to really serve the Jewish people in some way, in whatever small way. And because I've realized what the stain on the land that the British have left through studying the history, it's given me this passion to want to in some way repair the breach and encourage others, because there's no way I can do this on my own. And I'm just so grateful for so many people who have stood alongside me and been team with me when we've held these different events, or it's often been it's been a small number of very committed people who have the same passion and who've been called by God to do this, but we want to see more people involved. There are so many people out there living here who in some way have been marked by the stain of the British Mandate. There were good things. There were good things in the Mandate. I'm not saying it was all bad, but there are many who still carry that stain, and we want to repair this breach, and we want to reach out with love and compassion to these people and bring healing.
Do you have a website for people who'd like to know more?
Yeah, it's lnf.org.uk/RTB. That will get you to our webpage.
Okay, Rosie, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.